This is Let Me Sum Up, your regular deep dive into recent reports on climate and energy. I'm Luke Menzel, recording today on Wurundjeri land, and I'm joined today by one remote and two in-person co-hosts. Joining us remotely is Global Vice President for T-shirt Dispatch and Delivery at the Let Me Sum Up podcast, Frankie Muscovich. Hello, Frankie.
Good evening, folks. We've been dispatching and we've been delivering on the promise of merch madness over the last couple of weeks. It has been very gratifying to see actual orders come in from real-life people, I assume, across the country.
It's your mum.
That's right. No, I checked. I can't wait to be spotting some of these things in the wild, but it's exciting times.
It feels to me like we should be procuring social media selfies from early recipients of Let Me Sum Up podcast T-shirts, Frankie.
I did think about adding a little segment like people of LMSU or...
Soon to be a major motion picture.
That's right. Out in the world, wearing their T-shirts, carrying their important things in an LMSU tote, supping soups or teas or whatever it is you guys drink out of mugs, and sending them our way. I think we'll just formalise that request right here. Take some photos, send them to us. We will promote.
We'll promote, we promise. We're also joined by the newly minted director of the Grattan Institute's Energy and Climate Change Program, Alison Reeve. G'day, Alison, and congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much, Luke. Yeah. This was not planned to come on your podcast as my... Well, actually, it's not until the 1st of July, so this is not even my first official act.
When I saw it on social media, I just assumed that you timed it perfectly before this recording so that we could announce it exclusively here. I'm assuming you're not doing any other podcasts between now and Friday.
Not that I've been asked. No.
And can you tell us what prompted this ruthless grab for power?
Look, this was just our CEO realising that she had good people working on her program and she wanted to keep them. And she managed to convince some of our generous donors to the Grattan Institute that this was also a good idea. And
I understand Tony Wood ain't going anywhere.
No, that's right. So Tony is going to go sideways. And at the moment we're calling him a senior fellow, although I think he prefers not to be called senior. And here we're still working on the program 4 days a week. I'll be the program director and we will be making an announcement about recruiting for my own role in a month or so's time. So if you think you've got what it takes, you keep an eye on our website and, you know, I can't promise that we will screen the applications as to whether they listen to Let Me Sum Up or not. But
screen them based on whether they can suggest a title better than Senior Fellow.
Hey. Yeah, that'll work.
Hyper Fellow.
So, yes, I definitely think you should base your recruitment process on a Let Me Sum Up style competition.
I was going to say she wouldn't be the first one to use the pod to recruit. Like, weren't you shamelessly plugging some recruitment a while back?
I believe I was. I think that was part of the strategy for recruiting our new head of policy a couple of years ago. So,
well, there you go.
Yeah, it works.
There you go.
Maybe this could be a new monetisation strategy for the Let Me Sum Up podcast.
Move over, Seek.
MoveOverSeek.com.
And we are also joined by a man who in a recent group chat was designated the George Costanza of the Let Me Sum Up podcast, Tennant Reed. G'day, Tennant.
I'm not still sure how I feel about that.
It's just a height thing, all right? Luke is taller than you, Jerry's taller than George. It's not complicated.
They're killing independent Tennant. That's all I've got to say about this.
Oh, dear me. All right. On this week's show, we explore the ways in which the regulatory asset base associated with gas networks is like a 500-pound gorilla and what we might do to slim it down. But first, productivity is the watchword of the re-elected Albanese government, and the Productivity Commission is here to help with Australia's productivity pitch, a 12-month process which responds to a request from the Treasurer for advice on priority reforms in 5 so-called productivity pillars. Intriguingly for this podcast, one of those pillars is investing in cheaper, cleaner energy and the net zero transformation. And on that very broad topic, the PC recently sought feedback on 3 areas it felt were good prospects for reform: reducing the cost of meeting carbon targets, speeding up approvals for new energy infrastructure, and encouraging adaptation by addressing barriers to private investment. Frankie, we're a couple of months away from an interim report, but the question the PC is asking reveal a bit about their thinking. Where do you think this is all heading?
Well, I actually want to take a bit of a step back and look at kind of where this has come from and where it's going. I think last year, before we went up into the election, there was sort of sufficient and increasing evidence in a lot of macroeconomic data to confirm that the Australian economy is like not in a great spot. Like, we've got pretty sluggish economic growth, we've got relatively low unemployment. So it means that some of the constraints on growth are sort of happening elsewhere. And I think the wheels then were set in motion well before we went to the polls. So if you remember, I think Jim Chalmers tasked the Productivity Commission back in November, December with doing a review across these 5 pillars. And they've been beavering away whilst both political parties were campaigning the front end of the year. And so this latest, I guess, round of consultation, which I think I flagged in a One More Thing not too long ago, represented a sort of stepping stone in the process where that sort of started with the funnel being very wide. So on the 5 pillars, it asked like a bunch of different questions. They were actually really just sort of taking meetings and any feedback that people wanted to provide earlier on in that process. And where they've got to now is that they've started to narrow their thinking on where they think they're going to focus ideas for reform. So they've zeroed in the net zero pillar, if we can just shorthand to that, to those 3 things: reducing the cost of targets, speeding up approvals, and encouraging private investment in adaptation. And my sense of where we're going to next is that the PC is going to start rolling out these interim reports in a bit of a steady drumbeat up to and around a productivity roundtable or a big summit get-together that the PM has indicated he wants to host in August. And I think what's interesting about this is that clearly the government's, particularly from the economic portfolio's perspective, is really kind of framing up this whole term now around productivity and wanting to focus in on reforms. And I think probably, or maybe you'd suspect their hope is that they're going to be handed a bunch of recommendations from the PC that give them a bit of license to maybe go a little beyond some of the things that they committed to in their election campaign. And maybe we don't get drawn too much into what's in the other pillars. But the other thing that occurred to me when I was reading this is like you couldn't kind of ignore some of the framing for this that's maybe coming from a bit of a book club in Cabinet, having read Abundance, because a lot of what the PC's come out with here on the net zero stuff, particularly the theme around speeding up new energy infrastructure, is really heavy with we need to get things done faster. How do we streamline? How do we reduce regulation and do things efficiently? Where we are kind of now is revealing perhaps a little bit of pre-planning from the government before the election to give them a bit of a platform and some license to do stuff. I'm not overly surprised that they've focused in on the 3 areas that they have. I mean, we've all acknowledged in our chats previously that the rollout of renewables and transmission infrastructure in particular is not going as fast as we'd like it to. And so there's an imperative to look at how that might be done differently. The topic around meeting emissions targets, like there's echoes of we really just need a carbon price, or kind of broader, more broader based signals than that, although they're not zeroing in on a carbon price so much. The one that I'm more intrigued by is the adaptation piece, but I'm keen to see what you guys make of some of the things that are, I guess, suggested in their shortlist for further focus.
Well, on that point about the priorities that they've landed on and seeking further guidance on, in a couple of these areas there's a lot of prior art. It's actually kind of crowded, the number of processes and reports, either prior art that is been recently completed or even canvas that is still having paint applied. On the first one, on meeting targets more efficiently and effectively, we're just on the cusp of 6 sector plans and a net zero plan. And then you've got the NEM review, which is a significant feeder into decarbonising the economy more efficiently. Similarly, on the efficient rollout of infrastructure, that has had a huge amount of thought applied to it. And I just wonder a little bit with some of these processes, whether they're arriving in the obvious place of focusing on things that we all know are issues, but there are a lot of other challenges for the net zero transformation that aren't getting interrogated in the same way, that everybody is focusing on similar areas. See this a little bit with the Climate Change Authority, which has recently taken a keen interest in energy sector reform. Is the best use of the Climate Change Authority's time being another voice, coming up with more ideas for reform in the energy sector? I'm not sure. I think the Productivity Commission has some ideas to add in some of these areas that others probably won't talk about. And I think that things like extending the safeguard mechanism is something which the Productivity Commission has expressed singular interest in and probably won't emerge through some of these other processes. But I just think that we need to be very careful with all these various advisory bodies piling in, and that they're not all piling in on the same things and leaving some other areas unexamined that we really need to be doing some forward thinking on.
It was a bit frustrating that these pillars seem to be slightly more like silos rather than pillars as well. Like if you think about, wanting to get more efficient rollout of transmission, to some extent that is just a construction problem. The chair of the Productivity Commission made some remarks the other day talking about really poor productivity in the housing construction sector. That productivity problem there is also in the non-housing construction sector. And so, but that doesn't the fact that is a cross-cutting thing that is holding back productivity in more than one sector doesn't seem to be being picked up. And that's actually, to me, that was the sort of area where the Productivity Commission could lean in where other people would not.
Well, so two quick thoughts on both the instigation for this and the special source that the PC can bring, rather than just duplicating what other organisations are doing or have done. The macroeconomic circumstances that Australia faces and a lot of developed countries face today are very different from those in which the most recent wave of climate and energy policy were devised in. We don't have a lot of spare capacity in the economy. Australia never had to the same extent as the United States, this huge well of unemployed or underemployed people. We had a better response to the GFC, but still there was some slack in the economy. And you could say, well, more is more. If the government does more stuff will get done. And now we have a higher cost of debt for the government. We've got a lot of things that we want to get done, and this productivity lens is really, really useful as long as there's some there in getting mapping the huge amount that we want to achieve in climate and energy, but also in lots of aspects of the economy and society onto the resources that we have to throw at it. So, okay, that's good. The PC, as well as being a bunch of smart people, is an institution that speaks to and is respected by a different portion, not completely separate, but with some important overlap, but a different portion of the Australian polity and commentariat and so on than the Climate Change Authority does and other bodies do. And to the extent that they are raising these questions and then giving responsible answers to them, that should put us in a better place to implement stuff that is tricky. Changes to the regulation of construction of all sorts those potential changes have got all kinds of potential enemies. And the more reasons to prevail from different angles that people can get, the more likely governments are to actually persist through what will be, no doubt, some fierce criticism. So that can all be good. I have heard some people look at these the questions and the commentary that the PC put around these three pillars, and particularly I think some climate people got their backs up at the discussion on emissions targets and achieving those more efficiently, with the ghost of the still living, as far as I'm aware, Roger Wilkins.
The Wilkins Review.
Hovering over them, threatening to kind of myopically crush a bunch of policies that are suddenly thought not to be complementary to the one big carbon price, which people imagine the safeguard mechanism being shoehorned into being again. They do have some language in the paper, the questionnaire, that is maybe unnecessarily triggering.
Well, they're not necessarily helping ourselves by running around talking about subsidies for electric vehicles as, having a ridiculous cost of abatement, when you aren't looking at it from that sort of initial market transformation.
Exactly. This is about the difference between industry policy and carbon policy.
Yep.
If you want to have effective carbon policy, you need stuff to be on the shelf that the carbon price can take off, whether that's an electric car or a solar panel or whatever else. And in order to put stuff on the shelf, you need industry policy. And I mean, to me, what this goes back to is the difference between the RET and carbon pricing. The RET was an industry policy to build up an industry to the point where if you put a carbon signal into the electricity market, you would get an efficient outcome because renewables would be able to compete with other types of generation. The tax break for electric vehicles is an industry policy. The abatement is a happy side effect. And so when you put a lens over it and go, that's an abatement policy and it's very expensive and therefore we shouldn't do it, what you're actually doing is cutting off future cheap abatement, because the only way to get abatement to be cheap is to start doing it when it's expensive.
Yeah.
The reason solar is cheap now is because we started doing it 25 years ago when it was expensive.
Well, there's also a dynamic there where I think I think I might have expressed this view years ago when we did a previous PC report in which they had a go at this tax break. I think one of the reasons why the abatement shows up as being so expensive is paradoxically because the EVs have gotten so cheap that they're assumed to be, in the estimate, adopted anyway, and the margin of additional vehicles adopted as a result of the subsidy is then assumed to be very small. And what little extra abatement there is comes at the cost of throwing money at all the rest of it. And it's a weird place to get to where the cheapness of a technology makes deploying more of it look more expensive. But I don't know, are we all going to sort of die in a ditch over this particular tax break? The new vehicle efficiency standard is big. It's the lens, though. It's
the lens. It's understanding when you use industry policy and when you use carbon policy and what is the handoff from one to the other. Because that's actually the thing that we need to do over and over and over and over again to get to net zero. And if we don't have good understanding of that, we're going to find that just a really rough process. I mean, the tax break for electric vehicles is costing the budget way more than was ever forecast, and we have a structural deficit. So absolutely we should look at it, but we should also look at it with the lens of understanding it is an industry policy, and what is the point at which you say the industry is now large enough for this not to be the appropriate policy? And
I saw you in the media this week, I think, framing it appropriately, suggesting that it's more about understanding where the off-ramp is, right, from the handoff from one to the other, so you don't get stuck in a world of subsidies where everyone's just expecting this thing to turn up, when actually the more appropriate mechanism is a broader based climate policy.
It's at what point do you say that something is normal and so therefore you don't get a special little payment for being a good person?
Have we reached that point for enormo utes?
Yeah, well, if the PC would like to look at some other tax policies, then maybe they could look at that one.
Well, I think what's a little disappointing then around the scope of where they've sort of set their targets on the emission side of things is they haven't kind of looked a lot more broadly across the economy for other areas where there is that need to, support early phase deployment, of technology that's, it's not normalised yet and it does need that boost. And maybe it's unreasonable to expect the Productivity Commission to apply that kind of thinking. But as you said earlier, Luke, we actually do need to start paying more attention to other sectors of the economy and what's going to be needed there. Because what we expect to happen when we start getting all these things that we're, expecting to land on our desk in the next few months with 2035 target, overarching net zero plan, 6 sector plans, is that it's going to show that the lift from 2030 onwards, when hopefully most of the work in the electricity sector has been done, we're going to need those other sectors to be delivering at scale pretty quickly. So now's kind of the time that we really should be kind of doing that early stage thinking, and setting those sectors up for, for deployment on the tech and solutions that they're going to need. So this misses the mark a little on that rollout of energy infrastructure. I mean, I do kind of wonder if a lot of what they're getting at there is trying to create a bit of license for differential treatment under environmental reform, EPBC Act and the like. I could easily see that being a focus of where this might go. I could certainly see the connection to the housing kind of policy piece.
Have the Productivity Commission been reading Abundance? That's the
Isn't everybody?
Well,
Apparently.
So here's the other thing, and this is, I don't want to stray too much into the other pillars, but it's kind of clear to me when you consider people are generally accepting that we've got 3 kind of concurrent crises going on in Australia. We've got a housing crisis, we've got a climate crisis, there's a cost of living crisis. Those things are connected also. Getting ourselves out of a housing crisis and a climate crisis is going to require a bunch of new construction of stuff, be that energy infrastructure, generation and transmission, housing, and we're at historic employment rates. So I'm sort of picking up the point, Alison, I think you were getting at earlier, which is if we're not ready to kind of reckon with the idea that we've kind of been doing things like we've been building houses the same way we've been building houses for 200 years, and maybe there's a similar kind of argument that the way we do construction rollout in the energy space is not particularly productive or hasn't innovated. But there's a different policy lens you might apply to that problem rather than looking at climate triggers and EPBC Act, some of the things that I imagine we need to be
just changing zoning or something.
There's that, but also just the workforce. Where are we going to be getting the people to do all that construction? Or do we need to be pivoting away from relying so much on people to be doing some of that?
I am here for the robot agenda.
I figured you would be, T. Reed. But there's, I think it would have been cool to see a more strategic focus on where things like modular off-site construction across different supply chains might be relevant in more than one sector than another.
Well, so just I'm gonna reveal myself to be a PC stan here. Haven't we all, even me, been a little unfair to the PC in that what they have put out, is a questionnaire. Yes, there's some intro text to each question that sort of seems to tip some hands, but really it's going to be what answers do all of us and I guess some other people give to those questions. And if we've all got great ideas for things that the PC should really be focusing on, I hope we've all put them in. I put in a submission on behalf of my organisation, which had some wild and crazy ideas that we do not necessarily endorse, but went, well, you can have a think about this.
You didn't endorse the Japanese toilet idea, did you?
Oh, what's the Japanese toilet idea?
No, well, the PC at some point did point out a list of just some examples of some of the stuff that had just come in from the general public, and there was someone who felt very strongly that Australia should adopt the Japanese-style toilets with, the heated seats and a million buttons and so on.
Actually, one of my colleagues shared a submission that they had found from somebody else saying that Australia should use its future abundance of renewable energy to desalinate water in the far north and pump it into the centre of the country and flood it and create a permanent massive lake.
Like air, but
yep,
always
specifically
there.
like air.
Right.
And they thought this would be great and highly affordable. And I did like 5 minutes worth of dodgy spreadsheeting and went, this is beyond insane.
Where's your vision, Tennant?
My vision was full of $50 billion a year price tags.
Hey, I can't let us leave this item by touching on the adaptation piece, because as is so often the case, it doesn't get the focus that it deserves. And having had a chat to the lovely folks at the PC, they are putting a lot of good thought into that. And I think the acknowledgement we need to have up front here, right, particularly when it comes to managing climate risk across, millions of Australian homes, but also community infrastructure that connects them, to fund the upgrade of all of that building and infrastructure to be resilient to, who knows, a 1.5 degree, a 2 degree, a 4 degree future is going to cost a mozza. And so there is an imperative for us to, as early as possible, look at ways that we can incorporate provision of information, market signals in the form of, if it's reduced insurance premiums, or, start to embed price signals that are going to point people and support them to make their own investments to increase the resilience of their homes, because this is just not going to be a problem that governments can fund or solve on their own. And I just really appreciate the PC giving it some thought, because this has not got the attention that it needs from policymakers more broadly across government just yet.
And the approach that they're taking, attempting to unlock private investment at scale, seems to be the one that we're going to need to lean into, right? Because the investments we're talking about are so vast that it is not going to be possible for governments to commit all of that money to all of those upgrades to all kinds of not just housing but infrastructure right across the economy. I'll be fascinated to see what they come up with, noting they are focusing on the housing side of things, which is, I think, a smart place to focus, particularly as we're contemplating all of these energy upgrades right around the country. Is there the opportunity to integrate things like thermal performance upgrades into a broader electrification program, so you get that resilience dividend at the same time as you get the affordability and emissions?
I was actually a little bit sceptical about that, though, because one of the things about resilience is that it's so centred in place that it doesn't matter if I do everything right, resilience-wise on my house. If my neighbour doesn't, I'm not safe. And so sort of seeing this as being like something that could be largely done through private investment, even noting that it has to be because of the amount of money, could just be a recipe for it being very piecemeal, which means it doesn't really have the same level of effectiveness.
Well, could one of the drivers of private investment be things like minimum building standards that roll in over time, and so there's a requirement for a certain level of performance in buildings?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is also, with a lot of this, one of the questions that was in my mind was who is going to lead the conversation in public that gets everybody up to the point where they go, yes, the PC's recommendation is a good idea. Because we haven't started that resilience conversation with the general public yet. And you can't lob in a thing that says, hello, you're all going to be paying twice as much for your insurance now because we have to adapt, if someone hasn't led out on that conversation.
I think the sad reality is that's already been happening, right? People are already paying way more for insurance in hazard, particularly sort of hazard affected areas. And whilst I think, yes, of course, you can do things in the building code, wouldn't it be great if one of us was in a position to do something about that? But the thing
Lordy, that'd be incredible.
But the thing that I worry about is the millions of existing homes out there, which is like in having spoken to the PC about, I know is probably the thing that's exercising them. And like just an example I would give that kind of goes to Alison's point, and here's where, there does need to be, I think, a broader public dialogue about this, because there's no way you arrive at a conclusion by which, it's all down to individual homeowners to do their upgrades. Governments are going to have to, and they have a responsibility for looking at their role as the procurers of infrastructure and the systems that connect households together. But at some point, there may well be a reckoning by which, for given places where risks are exceptionally high for some things, you make a collective decision that you are, perhaps not going to require hundreds of thousands of homes to be built to, standards that will, ensure their homes, are retained largely intact after an event. But you invest money in community infrastructure, gathering places that will be. And so I think there is going to need to be a choice made around where some of the investment goes. And it may be in some areas that have higher risks, you choose to invest in, if it's the gathering place that, people are supported to evacuate to, that is the thing that remains. Like these are really tough conversations to be had. And we're already massively behind the 8 ball on some of this, because we're already, in a situation where vast parts of northern New South Wales and Queensland have been regularly flooding now, 1 in 500-year floods every few years. And like managed retreat is not some kind of theoretical concept off into the never. Like it's actually happening right now. So all that's to say, lots of tough decisions and conversations to be had, but we do need to be having them. And I'm supporting anything that's putting good thinking out there.
Well, in that spirit, or its opposite, why not make tough decisions easier by adding them to the context of different tough decisions? Australia's under pressure to spend an additional 1% of GDP or more on defence.
I thought you were going to segue to the paper there, Ten. You've gone somewhere else.
I'm going rogue.
Paper schmaper.
Can these gathering places, these temperature
nuclear
safe
fallout shelters,
can they be defence spending houses?
Oh my God, that's wild.
$20 billion a year of that's
how closely is Trump going to look at that line item in the budget? We just need to stick it into the defence budget.
That's right. You can stick anything you like in there. Maybe we could put the electric vehicle tax credit in there as well.
I hope you're listening, Productivity Commission.
Cybertrucks have a defence mode. It's all good.
Can I end on a related but more relevant point than that?
It's a bit more relevant than that, but go ahead, Frankie.
Okay. We're now seeing the government's needing to respond to the aftermath of natural disasters become such a regular, predictable occurrence that it's kind of like a budget line item now. I actually think, though, the fact that that number now exists on a regular, predictable basis gives a much stronger policy rationale for the investment in mitigation efforts to avoid that, that recovery cost or mitigate the extent of that cost. And that's where I could sort of see that conversation going.
All right. Shall we segue from one wicked problem to another and chat about a report?
I guess.
In Australia, the cost of investing in reticulated gas networks is recovered over time through gas bills. The total amount that gas network owners can recover from gas users is known as the Regulated Asset Base, or RAB. The RAB can be thought of as the outstanding value of the amount owed by gas users to the networks. However, this is a debt that individual consumers can opt out of by electrifying their space heating, hot water and cooking and removing their gas connection. Great for them, but when that consumer leaves the gas network, the value of the RAB stays the same, even though there are fewer gas users to cover the tab. This puts up bills for the remaining consumers, which increases the incentive for them to electrify. This in turn results in more consumers leaving the network, which leads to even higher bills, and around we go. This creates the so-called death spiral, and how to resolve it is one of the great political and regulatory challenges of the energy transition, with potentially huge equity implications for energy users. Enter the Notorious RBD, Monash University's Ron Ben David, who presented a paper that proposes a novel solution to the problem at the EEC National Conference last month. Titled The 500-Pound Gorilla of the Gas Transition, or Confronting the Regulatory Asset Base Problem, the paper proposes a bold manoeuvre which would see the RAB gradually decoupled from the physical gas network and auctioned off as a financial asset, which derives its revenue not from gas networks, but from the electricity distribution network. Tennant, this is a short paper with some very big ideas. What did you make of it?
So I really enjoyed this paper, and I think it is a great one to read. It's a very approachable paper to read. People should read it. There's an element in the solution that Ron proposes that like other people have thought of, and there's some stuff in there that I haven't seen anybody put in quite this way. And some of it I'm not sure if I agree with, but it's very, very well worth taking seriously. He states the problem very clearly, which is that somebody has got to bear the cost of the regulated asset base, and the somebodies who are available are consumers or taxpayers or investors. And that's it. You can find like different configurations of those, but it's got to be somebody, and whoever it is may not like it if it's a dramatic change from what they understood the situation to be. And he's speaking in the context of a debate that has been largely focused on accelerated depreciation of the regulated asset base. So the network's recovering faster, somewhat faster, the money that they were meant to recover over a much longer period. And there was some guff about this being, at one point, about this making the network an even better deal for future customers who would continue to use gas. But in fact, it's about getting your money out before customers have the chance to leave. And in Ron Ben David's view, that just brings on the death spiral faster because prices go up now, even though the accelerated depreciation means they could be, if people weren't leaving, prices could be lower later. You've paid off more of the network now, but that tomorrow will not come in that way. And others hate accelerated depreciation too. And Energy Consumers Australia have put some proposals to sharply limit the ability to do accelerated depreciation, but they were saying, but you probably still need it. We reluctantly come to that conclusion. Ron's view is, no, you don't need it. And he proposes an alternative. And who does he stick with the cost? It's still consumers, but it's a different group of consumers.
Well, not really.
No. Well, yeah. Well, much will turn on people convincing themselves that it is or isn't a different group of consumers.
I thought that was actually one of the things that he didn't say this directly, but it is one of the things that bugs me about this debate is that people act as if gas consumers are not also electricity consumers.
Yes.
I challenge you to find me a gas consumer in this country who does not have an electricity bill.
So spoiler alert, it's electricity users.
Oh, sorry. I thought you'd said that.
No. Well, so, okay, Ron has a simple, easily stated 10-point plan.
I'm not sure it needed 10 points.
I 100% agree. I think this could have been a 4-point plan. But he broke some of the points out for literary effect and to make things extra clear. So just a very quick race through the 10 points. He wants to revalue the gas RAB, the regulated asset base, regularly. He says maybe every 5 years, to reflect the lower gas throughput on those networks that he expects to see. And for distribution networks, I think everybody expects to see that lower throughput. We could argue about what's going to happen at the transmission level. So you scale down the regulated asset base to reflect that lower throughput, and the difference, the number of regulated asset base dollars that you're taking away from the RAB, you put that into a new bit of your great big regulatory spreadsheet, and he calls this new number Delta.
Can I propose an alternative name? Let's call them RAB-bucks.
RABcoin.
RABcoin, there you go.
Oh, dear.
Which may take us into some associations of financialisation that are actually quite appropriate.
Yeah.
All right, RABcoin or Delta would be a new standalone asset, and it would be a completely financial asset with no connection to the physical reality of the network. It's just a dollar sum.
It's almost like a bond or something like that, in that it's like a right to be paid something at a point in time.
Yes. And the amount that you get the right to be paid, this asset, this Delta or RABcoin, is facially worth what it was worth when it was hived off from the real RAB, but it's auctioned off. So it's sold to whoever will bid for it, and the thing that the bidders are bidding is a rate of return that they require, and a time period over which the asset is going to be amortised or paid off. And then the auction returns are given upfront to the gas networks off whom this RAB has been taken. And you keep doing this process regularly, say every 5 years. And who's underwriting, who's standing behind the stream of revenue that is associated with, or payback that is associated with the RABcoin? It is electricity networks, relevant electricity networks, whoever they are, and they're going to pass those costs on to their customers. So electricity users, maybe those who do directly overlap with the areas where the gas networks are and customers are literally migrating or shifting the balance of their use. But electricity users will pay a stream of money over time that will ensure that investors don't get screwed. Is it the overwhelming priority that investors not get screwed? I would argue probably that's quite important, but people may differ. Are the electricity users getting screwed? And is a thing people will argue about. And should governments throw money in is a question people will ask too. And Ron does ask all those questions at the end and strokes his chin and says they're difficult. But here's my idea. And that's it. Problem solved.
So just going to the equity bit of this, these won't ultimately be an amorphous blob of electricity consumers. There will be actual electricity consumers. The ones that are probably getting it worst in the neck are the ones that are still on the gas network and are also having this additional charge applied to their electricity bill.
Yes, I think they are. Because if you're stuck on the gas network for whatever reason and you're paying this bit so that, you know, and I mean, I think there's a bit of robbing Peter to pay Paul going on here between what you otherwise would have paid on your bill, and it's just that you are actually paying the accelerated depreciation cost. It's just you're paying it from a different part of your household budget. You're paying it from your electricity budget, not from your gas budget. Plus, at the same time, you're also paying through your electricity bills for any upgrades to the electricity network to support greater levels of electrification. So I think actually you're getting triple E screwed.
Well, Ron gamely speculates, which could be done and should be done, but is going to take a lot of doing, that electricity bills are going to be getting cheaper because we're going to be making more efficient use of the network with all this new demand that we're putting in.
I think the other equity point that's potentially relevant here too is that I think it's 96% of the distribution network is paid for by households, despite them not using 96% of the gas. There's a big cross-subsidy between commercial industrial users and residential users, and that would perpetuate under this model. particularly because it will be the commercial industrial ones who stay on the gas network longer.
Well, speaking for big industrial gas
Yeah,
users,
I know. I had to say it because I knew you wouldn't say it.
I would gamely opine that it's the little pipes that are so numerous and expensive to install and maintain, and those are for little users, and the little users create a big cost, and it's appropriate that they pay the lion's share of that.
I think the reason that all of this comes up is because we know that it doesn't matter which bit of the energy transition you're talking about. There's a lump of consumers who find it really hard to access it, and it's often because they don't own property. And so this is not actually unique in that. I don't think this is uniquely inequitable. You know, this inequity arises for electric vehicles, it arises for rooftop solar, for batteries, for getting people off gas. So I don't think I don't think it's additionally inequitable compared to the inequity that was already happening. And it just points to the need for governments to really focus on solutions for that group of people if they don't want them to be left behind.
To be fair to Ron, like I don't think he was proposing to solve that particular issue with the paper he's put out. But you're right, like again and again, when we look at different aspects of this transition, the need to do it in a just way and make sure that you're not leaving people who can't, afford to be early adopters of new tech or whatever it is last, demands a public policy response and, I think to a certain extent, priority given to those cohorts as well. And that's going to be just as necessary here as it's going to have to be elsewhere.
Yeah. I thought I read this and thought this is brilliantly clever, actually. I thought it was incredibly clever, and particularly because that new financial asset that you create has the same characteristics that attracted people to invest in gas networks in the first place, which is that they're low risk, low return, guaranteed revenue. And you've kept those qualities, which is what is attractive to people like pension funds and people who want a long-lived return. And so that to me sort of said this should be an attractive thing to invest in, the Delta or the RAB coin or whatever we're calling it. RAB bucks. Well, RBDs.
There you go.
RB dinars.
RB dinars, yeah.
I think that's right. I'd be interested to test the proposition with the potential pool of investors because the biggest ones are pension funds. I think this is an interesting proposition, right? Because you could, in a way, you could kind of market the investment in that as helping speed the transition in some way, Like I just think there's an interesting element to how super funds that are increasingly looking to signal their support for financing the transition to net zero would need to place this, in its in its own spot in that transition. But another option is that the government pitches into that auction as well, and then I guess that's just a variation of taxpayers footing the bill in that instance. Like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, do we think there would be a shortage of potential buyers for these
that
deltas?
was my question about the auction was, did you need to auction it? And then what happens if the auction doesn't clear? Like, what's the reserve price here? Does it end up being – I mean, I could sort of see a world where maybe the government buys some of them, holds them for a while until these things get proved up and people go, oh, actually that's a thing worth owning, and then just sells them again.
And if they did that, or even if the government bought them and held them in this model, it wouldn't be taxpayers paying ultimately. It would still be electricity consumers.
Yeah, I mean, what that would actually, the way that would function is it's just a tax on electricity users because it's money just going from them to general revenue.
So I agree with you, Alison. I think this is quite an elegant sort of machine that Ron has built to solve what seems like a pretty intractable problem. And the thing that I like about it is this idea of revaluing the RAB every 5 years and doing it in a way that actually tracks with our progress through the transition. That's really a useful idea, and doing it, and then you can come up with all kinds of solutions about what you do with it, and that goes to the apportionment of costs across gas users and electricity users and government and potentially investors taking a bath. And that, as he points out in the paper, it's not an economic decision, it's a political decision, right? And so while, he's come up with a way of kind of keeping all the assumptions broadly around who's paying for what intact, there are other ways you can do it. And that is ultimately something that politicians are going to have to grasp the nettle of. I did want to, Ron always has fantastic names for his papers. I remember a reference to Lara Bingle in a previous Ron Ben David paper, but I think he missed a trick there. I like the 500-pound gorilla of the gas transition, but I think instead of confronting the regulatory asset base problem, he could have called it How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the RAB. Because that's effectively, it's saying, okay, well, we've got this thing, we've got the RAB, we've got to engage with it and think about how its value will change over time and how we deal with that in a way that is going to be manageable as we work through the transition. The core thing he's concerned about is it crawling the political support for the transition that we're working through.
Yes.
So he's giving us some new tools in the toolbox for dealing with that.
And there's a couple of ways of coming at how do you change or improve the political economy of the transition of domestic gas use. The ECA proposals that Ron is sort of adding to have a go at changing that political economy by saying, well, maybe there's accelerated depreciation, but you can't have it, gas networks, unless you are fully owning up to the fact that your networks are going to go away.
Yeah.
And as long as you're in denial or running ads saying,
I love this idea.
Oh my God. I've just been itching to talk about the fact that I don't think that networks should be given a pass on this. They have to eat some of this cost, I would have to think. But the reason, I think there's conditions around that, but a really big condition, or I think the thing that we need to think about, right, is that you've got networks out there putting in requests for accelerated depreciation left, right and centre at the same time as paying social media influencers to spruik, hot gas-powered showers and gas cooking and stuff like that, and
on sponsoring MasterChef and everything else,
all of it,
yeah.
and at the same time, expanding the network further. I think there becomes a point. I think it does come to social license and that sort of support for the transition, where they cannot have their cake and eat it too, because that gorilla's fat enough.
I think that there would be a view that, given, that they're supposedly competent managers of companies, that either they were compensated adequately through past RAB decisions for any risks that they saw coming, or if they weren't compensated adequately, that would actually call into question whether they were any good at managing the company and seeing the risks that were coming at them down the pipe. There would be another school of thought that said, though, it was mandatory for us to connect gas to properties until it wasn't. And so we saw that as being, okay, there's no risk to us.
There were definitely mixed messages, I think, from a public policy perspective.
But if you were looking at companies, I noticed this in companies in Europe in sort of 2018 and 2019. The net zero penny that was dropping was not the how much is the marginal tonne going to cost me under the European carbon price. It's does my asset even have a future in a net zero world? And that was dropping all over the place. And that's really only dropping in Australia now, 5 years later, with some of these companies.
And so on changing the political economy, Ron's idea here is not necessarily incompatible with that demand that people show their penny and that they acknowledge the penny is real, of their business is going to change and a part of it is going to go away. But his idea is you just by doing this hive off and financialisation and payback, you make gas distribution networks indifferent to the transition. It is no financial skin off their nose that it is going to happen. They don't need to be worried about it. They're not going to have to explain to their investors that they've lost some large percentage of the value ascribed to the business. It's fine, and they can sail off into the sunset, or they can diversify, as many have, into electricity networks. And it's all good, which could also work quite well. It's a non-putative way. It does mean that consumers, or maybe consumers plus taxpayers, are bearing the transition cost. But it's a viable idea.
I did actually, I didn't have time to think this through today, but I was wondering what financial hijinks happen if you do have a company that owns both a gas network and an electricity network. Is this just shuffling money around on different bits of the balance sheet? Or
And actually, they mostly are diversified in Victoria, at least. I think there's only one network that isn't owned by an entity that also owns an electricity network.
But I think they own an electricity network in different states, don't they? 'Cause I know,
yes, that's true.
Yeah.
But there's one other that owns, they're just pure play.
Right.
They're all in on not losing the RAB.
How's that going for them?
Check back in 6 months.
In this scenario, they would stop effectively owning an asset. They would just be passing through a charge back to whoever was owning the RAB
The
bucks.
electricity owning entity. Yes, that's right. And then the gas owning part of the entity would just have a lump sum from the auction. And then a future lump sum at the next 5-yearly reset, and a stream of these consolation prizes.
This is so confusing and opaque, it just might work.
Financialisation leads to transparency.
I did have a little moment when I was reading this going, didn't we learn in the subprime mortgage crisis that chopping up, detaching your physical asset from the financial asset and then making the financial asset something you could chop up and sell into little pieces, that didn't go well?
I have no memory of that. It was fine, wasn't it?
I know you have these numbers, but we haven't kind of talked about one of the scenarios, which is, I guess, possible, but maybe not likely, which is the government just buys off, just cops the price and sort of writes off the value of it and pays it out. What is the value of the RAB across the NEM?
Well, so the tricky bit is how much. So the current total value of the gas distribution RAB across the eastern half of the country is $12 billion-ish. But quite a significant chunk of that just will be paid off by gas users continuing to use gas. If you didn't assume the sort of extra portion of the network ascribable to demand that won't be there was lumped onto the people who remain, just the people who remain paying the regular amount would pay off, on my dodgy numbers, about $4 billion of the $12 billion over the next 3 decades.
So we've got $8 billion.
We've got to find $8 billion. Have you checked under the couch?
It's across 4 million households or something, 5 million households.
Yeah.
So that's actually not a huge amount of money.
No, it isn't. Maybe £500 gorilla is overstating it. Maybe there are worse problems.
It's a cute little baby gorilla.
But if you try and ask the Victorian government for $4 billion or even $2 billion right now, they will say, can you come back next century?
Or, I don't know, maybe we try and disguise it as a periscope as on one of the subs that we'll never get or something.
I guess the flip side of that is if it's only $8 billion worth of RAB coin, is that actually enough for big investors to get interested in buying it and to set up this whole system and everything.
Well,
else
particularly because
around
it's only that incremental chunk of it every 5 years that they're engaging
it
with.
might only be $1 billion or something. It's a lot of faff for $1 billion, which might lead you down the path of going. A government goes, we'll just wear it.
Well, not the current Victorian government.
Well, yeah, I mean, your complex financial instruments look great when you haven't got any money, right?
Well, yes. Oh, that's something better. So you could imagine some kind of play here with, well, say that they take, the government takes a little bit off either by taking some money off taxpayers and handing it off, or saying like haircut to investors. If they loaded all of the remaining money onto electricity distribution customers, ultimately, that might be roughly a 10% increase in the equivalent of the regulated asset base combined obligations for those distribution networks. Distribution costs are about like 33 to 44% of household electricity bills. So say a 3 to 5% increase in household electricity bills once it's all ultimately in there, which it wouldn't all be in one go. Like that's nobody's going to like queue up and say, yes, please, I want that.
Well, but I also think there are bigger pressures on that chunk of electricity bills than this as well, right? So paying for the reses, paying for transmission, all of that sort of stuff is.
Well, I think transmission's fine, but like wholesale is terrible.
Not if you're in New South Wales.
Oh, but that is the roadmap.
Yeah.
Rather than the cost of the transmission itself.
Yeah, but. I mean, the point is that...
Sorry, New South Wales.
Yeah, I mean, it's also possible you could hide this within much bigger costs that are happening on that part of your bill as well.
Yes, although hiding yourself for safety amidst very unpopular people might just lead to you getting nuked along with them.
So I reckon Ron Pendavid has done it again. Like he has lobbed in a very useful provocation. And I suppose it is yet another opportunity for governments to have a real think about how they're engaging with this policy issue, because at the moment there is a profound lack of engagement.
Yeah.
And
that's a slow burn issue. That's we don't need to talk about that right now.
Well, the issue is, of course, they're leaving energy market bodies and regulators that fundamentally don't have the tools to deal with this themselves, with trying to muddling through.
Well, this is why we ended up with accelerated depreciation, is because you had the ACT government was the only government brave enough to put an end date on it, and you're going through a determination cycle, and you have to make a decision by a certain date. And if the government is not giving you clarity, you're kind of like, well, I've got to do something.
When all you've got is a hammer, it seems like all you can do is hit consumers with it faster.
Ouch.
I don't think the current situation is sustainable, that this continues to be unaddressed by our political leaders. I think that they're going to get mugged by reality if they don't start taking this on over the next couple of years.
Yep.
I mean, I think it's a really timely provocation from Ron, isn't it? And I think there's almost as much value in him explicitly stating the questions that remain to be answered, because those are political choices rather than policy design ones, to put them out there for broader debate because we need it. And I think he's made the point in the paper that inaction is not going to be tenable for anyone.
I was also casting around for going, what else could you apply this clever model to? I mean, the one I came up with was what he sort of raised was like, well, what happens if you then start to get the same sort of RAB issue within electricity networks because people take themselves off the network? And I'm like, you just find something else. You create an electricity delta asset and maybe we stick it on water or something. And it's like,
eventually we're going to run out of utilities. Stick financial assets on too.
Run out of unavoidable consumption. Yeah, people start avoiding that by getting a rainwater tank, and
There
then
you
you've got to
go.
stick it on Vegemite or something.
We'll put the electricity RAB onto the bunker RAB from the national bunker asset that we're going to construct to house people safely and like launch drones that can most of the time fetch you groceries and sometimes
And because
blow up invading ships.
Bunkers have beds in them, they count towards the housing target.
Brilliant.
Oh, Lordy.
We've done it. That's productivity.
Yeah. Taking notes, productivity.
As always, we close out the show with one more thing in which we will share something that is currently captivating our attention. Special guest, Alison Reeve. What have you got?
I want to say very happy anniversary to the renewable energy target because this Sunday, the 22nd of June, is the 25th anniversary of the day that the RET legislation was introduced to Parliament. I was just looking at this for a speech I've got to give on Friday, and one of the things that was sort of gently hilarious about this is the speech that was given by Sharman Stone when she introduced this legislation. I don't think she quite understood what she was unleashing by putting in this thing, which was only going to be 9,500 gigawatt hours, that actually what she was letting loose was, you know, the death of coal, the complete turning inside out of the electricity market, electrification, everything else that's come with it. And it all was out of just that little policy that could. So happy anniversary, Rat.
Hey.
Yay.
The other thing that was quite cute was the modelling they had showed that there was going to be 90 megawatts of solar installed in 2020, which we did indeed do. We just did that in the first 2 weeks of January 2020.
Am I right in saying that on a previous episode of this podcast, you said happy birthday to I guess energy ministers agreeing to do mandatory disclosure in housing?
Yes, and I also said I don't want to come back in a year's time and have this not done, and it is still not yet done.
Well, I just want to see the Reeve family calendar. Do you have all these policy anniversaries marked on your calendar?
No, I spend an inordinate amount of time in Trove because if you want to find stuff that governments have tried to make disappear, that is absolutely where it all is.
Well, I understand that while we still don't have mandatory disclosure in this country, we have made a step forward in terms of a national framework for assessing the energy performance of homes. NatHERS for existing homes is now more of a thing than it has been previously.
And I will celebrate the 20th birthday of that when it rocks around as well.
Very exciting. I think just today a few of us got an email from the team that have been doing that, and they're gearing up towards rollout. I know I've disclosed this to you guys off air, but I volunteered my house to participate in the trial run. So I had a really lovely guy come round to do the assessment of my house. It was super interesting. Luke, you were there that morning because you were
by pure happenstance
staying over around the election. So this poor guy didn't know what he was in for. Policy lead at the Property Council and the CEO of the Energy Efficiency Council, like very curious,
no pressure,
very curiously, just going, what are you? Just kind of awkwardly hovering and asking questions. It was great. But anyway, I'm super excited to see this thing roll out. And as I keep saying, we needed this thing 20 years ago, and the next best time is right freaking now. So let's get it done.
All right. Frankie, was that your one more thing, or do you have another one more thing?
Well, very quickly, I don't know what's in it, but tomorrow, so by the time this episode goes to air, the Australian Sustainable Finance Institute will have launched their Sustainable Finance Taxonomy. Which, has been in the works for some time. And I imagine they were putting the finishing touches on that through Caretaker early this year. So, yeah, I think that's launching out tomorrow. So that'll be accessible for people to have a look at. And hopefully, that if done right and picked up, that is a system that could really harness and enable more investment in the transition across a range of sectors. So that's something to be excited about too.
Well, they could squeak in Delta assets, surely. I think we need to know.
Might be in V2.
I'm texting Christy now. Yeah. I'm sure she'll get right on that.
On more interconnections, Alison, have you considered the possibility of sticking the gas RAB into Trove?
Oh, for future people to find.
Just make it go away.
Is that your one?
No. My one more thing is we have mentioned previously on the pod, and particularly around the time of last year's COP, the excitement in the United States or parts of the US about advanced geothermal energy generation and the high hopes that the former Biden administration had for that. Those high hopes are starting to actually be realised on the ground, and geothermal startup Fervo Energy have had a flurry of media releases recently. They're drilling more successfully than ever before to establish geothermal generation. They're speeding up their drilling process. They are on track, and they're getting gobs of money thrown at them by investors to have 100 megawatts of advanced geothermal operating next year at a site, at another 400 megawatts 2 years after that. They have site approval for 2 gigawatts. We're going to get the chance, it looks like, to see how this works and if it's as exciting and doable as it appears. That could make a lot of changes in energy debate, including should it filter through to Australia, if people get over the PTSD of the geothermal boom that went nowhere with a quiet whiffle 15 years ago, make a difference to that little fudge factor at the back end of the integrated system plan, which is the amount of gas peaker capacity you need. If you've got a little wedge of advanced geothermal in there just doing its thing, or even operating in a peaky way, the amount of extra just in case of emergency capacity you need might not be as large. That's a lot of ifs, but we'll be closely watching how these first double-digit and triple-digit megawatts of capacity go in the States.
Will they be more or less expensive than small modular nuclear reactors?
They'll be much more existent.
So by definition.
By definition.
Yeah.
Further on that deployment curve.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll watch that with interest. For my one more thing, I'm going to recommend the latest quarterly essay from Hugh White, Hard New World, Our Post-American Future, which provides some pretty bracing analysis of the new multipolar world that we're all barreling towards, accelerated, I suppose, by the new Trump administration in the US and the implications for Australia's foreign and defence policy. Some of the arguments in this essay will be familiar to anyone that's been following Hugh White's work over the last number of years, but I reckon they have a new weight in our current moment, and I also recommend it to people that aren't necessarily interested in foreign affairs or defence policy, but people that are interested in climate policy. This is not an essay about climate policy. I think it's mentioned once in however many thousand words is contained within the 2 covers of this quarterly essay. But it is an essay about the world of competing great powers, the multipolar world that we're finding ourselves in, and that is the world in which climate policy will take place over the next few decades. And it feels like a pretty useful reference for anyone who is trying to work out how to navigate all of that. I've stunned my co-hosts into silence.
You've segued us into being a national security podcast all of a sudden.
We started there. It's all been security.
It's all
along.
security now.
Yeah, well,
it's all spooks all the time.
It's sort of weak, isn't it? We're almost done, but every fortnight after the show, we record a bonus episode called there is too much in which we pour ourselves a drink and cover something we didn't have time for on the main show. Alison, I think you came up with our topic this week. What are we going to be chatting about?
I thought that maybe we should have a little chat about the New South Wales Nationals, who at their annual conference on the weekend decided to disendorse net zero.
That seems sad.
Well, you said we were going to have drinks.
Right. We'll get right on that. This is the same National Party who voted in the New South Wales Parliament for one of the most bipartisan, multi-partisan climate settlements in Australian history. So,
well, no spoilers. Keep it behind the paywall.
All right, we'll dig into that. If you would like to access that sweet bonus content, of course, all you need to do is go to our shiny new website, letmesumup.net. Click on Support LMSU at the top of the page and you'll be able to find our Patreon and find out what we reckon about this development from the Nats. Pro or con? Who can
We'll keep you guessing.
All right. That is our show for today. This podcast was edited by Energy Professional and Podcast Tragic Mark Spencer from Here Media Studio. We have now, Frankie, one central place on the World Wide Web where everybody should go to do all the things related to Let Me Sum Up Global. Where is it and what is there?
Oh, so many delights to be discovered at the brand spanking new shiny website www.letmesumup.net. You can listen to every free episode we've ever done, which is a lot around now. We're like, over 70 episodes now? 73?
This is episode 74.
74 episodes in. Still going, still talking about gas policy and T-shirts, which is also something you can find on our website. Press the merch button. It'll take you to our little Das T-shirt automat shop front and you can grab yourself a tee, a mug, a tote, whatever you like. What else is there? There's an about page. Tells you a little bit about us and why we're doing this whole thing in the first place. You can also leave us a voice note if you like. We'd love to hear your voices. So send us your ideas for papers. Give us some feedback on the merch. I don't know. Throw some sort of shit our way for discussion. Like, we love it. So that's just a sampling of things you'll find on this website. I'm sure I've missed something, but there's just too much to consider.
Well, mathematically, if you, dear listener, go to the website, buy a T-shirt and sit there waiting for the T-shirt to be delivered while listening to episodes in which we talk about these T-shirts, the T-shirts will arrive before you run out of T-shirt discussion episodes.
Yeah, I think that's right.
They are very quick. Mine arrived in like 5 days.
Hey.
There you go. Well, get on that. Get on all that. The T-shirts, the mugs, the tote bags, the voicemails, the contact tab where you can submit papers, letmesumup.net. But that's it for this week, gang. For Frankie Muscovich, Tennant Reed and Alison Reeve, I'm Luke Menzel. Thanks for listening and we will talk to you again soon.